Looking at a new chapter in Standard 10th, Our Environment. All organisms, such as plants, animals, microorganisms, and human beings, as well as the physical surroundings, interact with each other and maintain a balance in nature. Let us look at what is an ecosystem. So, the definition would be all the interacting organisms in an area together with the non living constituents of the environment form an ecosystem. There are two types of ecosystems, namely biotic and abiotic. Now, under the biotic ecosystem, we have the living organism, and under abiotic components, we have physical factors like pressure, temperature, rainfall, wind, soil, and minerals. Let us look at the types of ecosystems. There are two types of ecosystem, namely natural ecosystem and artificial ecosystem. Natural ecosystems are forest, ponds, and lakes, whereas artificial ecosystems are garden and crop fields. Let us look at the basic terminologies in this chapter. Firstly, let us talk about producers. What are producers? All green plants and certain bacteria which can produce food by photosynthesis. All these come under this category and are called producers. So, how do producers produce food? They produce food by the method of photosynthesis. Organisms depend on producers either directly or indirectly for their sustenance. The second terminology we'll be looking at is consumers. Who are consumers? Organisms which consume the food produced either directly from the producers or indirectly by feeding on the consumers are the consumers. Now, the consumers can be classed variously as herbivores, carnivores, omnivorous, and parasites. Let us look at the third terminology, which is decomposers. The microorganisms comprising of bacteria and fungi which break down the dead remains and waste products of organisms. Now, who are decomposers? Bacteria and fungi. Basically, they are microorganisms. These microorganisms break down the dead remains and the waste products of organisms. These microorganisms are the decomposers as they break down the complex organic matter into simple inorganic substances that go in the soil and are used up once more by the plants. These are used up as fertilizers. That is a good manure. They form a very good manure for the plants. So they decompose as this complex organic substances into inorganic substances. They are very simple inorganic substances. So you need to remember this. Let us move ahead to food chains and food webs. In this image you see here, this is a typical food chain. So let us understand the basic definition of what is a food chain. This series or organisms taking part at various biotic levels form a food chain. The interactions among various components of the environment involves flow of energy from one component of the system to others. The autotrophs capture the energy present in sunlight and convert it into chemical energy. So, in this image you see here, you will see the autotrophs which are giving supplying energy to the primary consumers, which is a deer. The deer is finally consumed by the tiger. So, this is an example of a food chain. From autotrophs, the energy goes to the heterotrophs and the decomposers. When one form of energy is changed to another, some energy is lost to the environment in the form which cannot be used again. So, afterwards in the chapter, we'll be learning about the 10% energy loss law. At each level, at each stage, there is some amount of energy which is lost to the environment, and this energy cannot be used again. Let us look at the some of the generalized food chains. So, first one you have sun producers, which are your green plants. They stand at the first trophic level. Then comes your consumer one, which is a herbivore, which makes up to the second trophic level. Consumer 2, that is small carnivore, that makes up to your third trophic level. Consumer 3, which is your large carnivore, and that is the fourth trophic level. Some examples of food chains on land. Grains, which are autotrophs, they are eaten by the sparrow, and sparrow is in turn eaten by the cat. Grass, autotroph, rabbits eat grass, and hawks feed on rabbits. Cacti, ants or locusts eat the cacti. This locust or ants are further eaten by the spider. Spiders are eaten by lizards, and lizards are eaten by snakes. Some examples of food chains in water. Let us look at these examples. Algae. Algae is eaten by protozoa. Protozoa is further eaten by the small fish. Small fish is eaten by the big fish, that is photoplanktons. Algae is eaten by tadpoles. Tadpoles are the frogs, small frogs. It's the larval amphibian. These tadpoles are further eaten by small fish, and small fish are later eaten by the big fish. Next, the flow of energy between various components of the environment has been extensively studied, and it has been found that these are the conclusions and the findings. The first one, the green plant is a terrestrial ecosystem, captures about 1% of the energy of the sunlight that falls on their leaves and convert it into food energy. Next, when green plants are eaten by primary consumers, a great deal of energy is lost as heat to the environment. So, I was talking in the previous case that energy is lost, right? So, how is this energy lost? You may be wondering. So, energy is lost as heat. Sorry. Some amount goes into digestion and in doing work, and the rest goes towards growth and reproduction. An average of 10% of the food eaten is turned into its own body and made available for the next level of consumers. Therefore, we can conclude that 10% can be taken as the average value for the amount of organic matter that is present at each step and reaches the next level of consumers. So, what is the average value that can be taken? The average value is 10%. Since so little energy is available for the next level of consumers, food chains generally consist of only 3 to 4 steps. This is very important to note that a food chain cannot have more than 3 or 4 steps. They generally consist of only 3 or 4 steps. Why? The loss of energy at each step is so great that very little usable energy remains after the fourth tropic level. There are generally a great number of individuals at the lower tropic level of an ecosystem. The greatest number is of the producers. The length and complexity of the food chain vary greatly. Each organism is generally eaten by two or more other kinds of organisms, which in turn are eaten by several other organisms. So instead of a straight line food chain, the relationship can be shown as a series of branching lines called a food web. So what is a food web? A food web is basically a complex food chain. It shows that each organisms are eaten by many organisms, two or more other kinds of organisms that you can see. We'll be looking at the structure of a food chain a bit later. This is what your tropic level looks like. You'll have the producers at the base, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Notice that your primary producers, the base is very large, right? And as it goes higher, it becomes narrower. It's in a form of a triangle with a base that is very large. That symbolizes that a great number of organisms are producers. From the energy flow diagram, two things become clear. First, the flow of energy is unidirectional. What is unidirection? Unidirection is one direction. So the flow of energy is only in one direction. I'll just rub this. Give me a second. Okay. The energy that is captured by the autotrophs does not revert back to the solar input, and the energy which passes to the herbivores does not come back into the autotrophs. As it moves progressively through the various trophic levels, it is no longer available to the previous level. So, this paragraph clearly states the definition of what is the meaning of unidirectional. So, the energy which passes to the herbivores at your first trophic level, it does not come back to the autotrophs. As it moves progressively through the various trophic levels, it is no longer available to the previous level. So, the fourth level cannot be available to the third level. This statement symbolizes this thing. Secondly, the energy available at each topic level gets diminished progressively due to the loss of energy at each level. We have already seen the 10% law previously, so this is what it states. Another aspect of food chain is how unknowingly some harmful chemicals enter our bodies through the food chain. This is an example of a food chain. A food chain, I have already told you, is a complex network and it forms a food web. Remember one thing, that harmful chemicals enter our bodies through the food chain, which are pesticides and other chemicals we use to protect our crop from disease and pest. This is one of the main reasons. These chemicals are either washed down into the soil or into the water bodies. What then happens is, from the soil, these are absorbed by the plants along with water and minerals. And from the water bodies, these are taken up by the aquatic plants and animals. This is one of the ways in which these pesticides or harmful chemicals enter our body through the food chain. As these chemicals are non degradable, that is, they do not degrade, they get accumulated progressively at each topic level. As human beings occupy the top level in any food chain, the maximum concentration of these chemicals get accumulated in our bodies. This phenomena is known as biological magnification. So, students, kindly remember the definition of biological magnification. This is an important question that can be asked from exam point of view. This is the reason why our food grains such as wheat and rice, vegetables and fruits, and even meat contain varying amounts of pesticides residues. They cannot always be removed by washing or other means. That's the reason you need to be very careful with your food, with what you intake, as they can contain varying amounts of pesticide residues. I briefly mentioned the steps involved in biological magnification. So, the first step which occurs is pesticides and other chemicals are sprayed on your crops. They are later washed down in the soil. From there, they enter the aquatic animals and plants, and these animals and plants consume it. We consume these chemicals from the food we intake, and these chemicals later get accumulated in our body. Let us look at the difference in food chain and food web. Food chain. Let us look at each one of them simultaneously. So, food chain is a straight sequence of organisms, whereas a food web is a complex network formed by many food chains. Second point, food chains do not have cross linkages, whereas a food web have many cross linkages. Third, the entire food chain gets affected if any organisms dies in it. The third point under food web, there is no effect on other organisms in the food web if any organisms dies in it. The fourth point under food chain, it has a maximum of 5 to 6 population of different species. In food web, it has many populations of different species. So this is an important definition that can be asked. Differentiate between food chain and food web. So kindly remember this, go through it and remember it point wise. The last topic in the chapter is how do our activities affect the environment? Ozone layer and how it is getting depleted. What is ozone? Ozone is O3 is a molecular form by three atoms of oxygen, while O2, which we normally refer to as oxygen, is essential for all aerobic forms of life. You very well know that without oxygen we cannot survive. Ozone is a deadly poisonous gas. However, at the higher levels of the atmosphere, ozone performs an essential function. What is the function ozone performs? It shields the surface of the earth from the ultraviolet radiations from the sun. This ultraviolet radiation, let me tell you, is highly damaging to organisms. For example, it causes skin cancer in human beings. Ozone at higher levels of the atmosphere is a product of UV radiations acting on oxygen molecules. The higher energy UV radiations split apart some molecule oxygen, which is O2, into free oxygen O atoms. These atoms then combine with the molecular oxygen to form ozone as shown. So, in this paragraph, it basically explains the formation of ozone. Let us look at the formation once again. O2, in the presence of UV radiation, splits apart molecular oxygen, that is O plus O, O plus O2 combine to form ozone. This is also an important question which can be asked for your exams. The amount of ozone in the atmosphere began to drop sharply in the 1980s. This decrease has been linked to the synthetic chemicals like chlorofluorocarbon, which are used as refrigerants and in fire extinguishers. In 1987, the United Nations Environment Programme UNEP succeeded in forging an agreement to freeze CFC production at 1986 level. Remember the year, students? It is now mandatory for all the manufacturing companies to make CFC free refrigerators throughout the world. Since CFCs are depleting the ozone layer, therefore, the UNEP succeeded in forging an agreement to freeze CFC production. Now, all the companies, it is very mandatory for them to make CFC free refrigerators, and this is applicable throughout the world. Let us also look at another difference between biodegradable and non biodegradable. It's given in a paragraph form in your textbook. I've given it here in a differentiate form, which would be easier for you to remember. What is biodegradable? Which are the substances? Kitchen waste, food waste, eggshell, newspapers, garden waste, weeds, dead leaves. These are all examples of biodegradable material. Whereas your non biodegradable material is plastic, metal, glass, aluminium foil, thermocol. All these do not degrade, therefore, they come under non biodegradable substances. Waste that decompose due to biological processes. These are waste which are not broken down by biological processes. They follow the 3R system, that is reduce, reuse, recycle. These arrows are a bit mismatched here and there, but kindly excuse it. Now, the third point here under biodegradable is the process, how it decomposes. I'll redraw the arrows. So, soil, then it moves to your microorganisms. The microorganisms decompose the waste material and they convert it into natural manure, which is very essential for your crops. Next, materials are acted in non biodegradable by physical processes like heat and pressure. In biodegradable, complex organic substances are converted to simple organic substances, whereas in non biodegradable, these substances may be inert and simply persist in the environment for a long time and may harm the various members of the ecosystem. Lastly, the amount of garbage produced is increasing rapidly due to the following reasons. These are the four main important reasons you need to remember. The first one is increase in population. As we increase in population, our needs increase. Therefore, we utilize and consume more amount of material, which are then treated as waste. Second, improvements in our lifestyle. With the need of increasing technology, advanced, I would say advanced gadgets, advanced sophisticated things, we are improving our lifestyle. And this, in turn, in different ways, is affecting the amount of garbage, the amount of waste an individual produces. Third, changes in attitude. With more and more things we use becoming disposable, always try avoiding the use of single use plastic. You could either switch to using steel cups, steel plates. That would be a more sustainable option because you have a longer lifespan of those kind of substances. Changes in packaging material have made our waste non biodegradable. You must have always noticed when we buy a product, it is wrapped in many layers. And majorly, these layers are made of single use plastic. Now, these plastic cannot be decomposed. Therefore, they go under the non biodegradable category, and it increases the garbage we produce. So, remember these 4 points. These are the reference sources. Thank you, and I hope you like this explanation and you were able to understand the chapter well. If you do like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment, and don't forget to subscribe.